Welcome to the Old Man and the Three Things. This week's episode, we are joined for the first time by Tim Legler. My guy, Tim, what's going on, man?
What's up, man? I'm excited. Excited about the season. Excited about doing this with you. We've got some unreal storylines heading into the season. It's been, as usual, a pretty wild off season in the NBA.
Well, that's what the NBA is here for, to provide us with a soap opera from the months of July to October, although one soap opera is still going on in Philadelphia, and we are going to get to that in a little bit. I do want to make this announcement. Starting this NBA season, we are adding a fresh addition to our podcast lineup, The Old Man and the Three Things. This will be on our normal audio feed. Video will be distributed as the same way as The Old Man and the Three. Full episodes will be up on our YouTube channel. Please go subscribe to that. Every Monday, basketball, I'm reading a line here. This is very complimentary. I don't know about this, but basketball masterminds like Tim Legler, Nekias Duncan, and Steve Jones will be joining me for a breakdown of the top three things that you need to know heading into this week's NBA matchups. This episode will be fully live on YouTube. And starting October 30th, starting next week, Legs, you're going to be joining me. Our audio will be going wide. It will live on our normal feed. Go hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to your podcast. I know you've gotten into some radio stuff. You have your SiriusXM show. Obviously, you've been a legend at ESPN for a number of years. First time really dabbling in the podcast space. Can't tell you how excited we are that you agreed to do this, Tim.
No doubt, man. I appreciate you reaching out, because I think that one thing you and I have learned here the last couple of years connecting. We see a lot of things similarly, and sometimes we even have similar takes, but we have a totally different angle that we come about it from. So I think that's the most important thing we're going to do here is just have a great basketball conversation and hopefully open some people's minds to some things they might not have thought about before. I think that's the goal.
Absolutely. We have a lot to get into today. And I've explained the structure of the show to you, a lot of different ways we can do this. For today's episode, we are going to play a what-if game. And we are going to look at this through the lens of positivity. Not a what-if if player A gets hurt, what happens to that team? But what if X happens? Does that make a team a contender, a true contender? Because I think we can sit here and argue about this, but for me, my tier one contenders, Nuggets, Suns, Boston, Milwaukee, and I've got the Lakers just outside of that. So what do a number of teams, because there is parity across the league, what do a number of teams have to have happen in a positive way? What do they need to go right for them to be a tier one contender this season? I'm going to start with you. What is your first what if?
Well, first, I'm going to start off by saying I agree with you with the tier one teams. When you look at true contenders, and I actually think the Suns might be a slight notch below those other three, right? Milwaukee, Boston, and Denver. The reason I say that is because obviously they've got the talent accumulated, but there's no core continuity that they're building on. Those other three teams all have that. Boston, obviously, with Tatum and Brown and some of those role players. The Bucks have Giannis and Middleton. You add Lillard, but you've got a core base of role players that have been there. Denver, clearly. So Phoenix is a little bit, to me, maybe just a half a step behind those three, but because of the talent level, they're in that group. Now, who else can make things really interesting and get into that conversation? I'm going to start with the Pelicans. Now, you said we're going to keep this optimistic. We're going to make certain assumptions in a positive direction. So let's make the assumption that Zion Williamson finally puts together a season where, he's able to play 70 games and he's able to be there for an entire postseason run. They are so interesting to me because when I look at the key components that they have, JJ, you've got elite level point guard play with CJ McCollum. You've got what you need in this league, which is a big time wing with some size that can get his own shot. You've got that in Brandon Ingram, who was a tier one scorer. And then you've got this unique freak in Zion Williamson. And there's no real matchup for him. He his efficiency level in the paint, the damage that he does, the way he breaks defenses down, the number of people he commands that it takes to be able to deal with him in the paint, what that does for their team and what that does for role players and open looks for three-point shooters. He is the difference maker potentially and the Pelicans getting into that conversation. Now, look, I don't know that I would say even if you told me right now, Zion's going to play 75 games, he's going to be healthy all year, he's not going to have any issues. If you told me that with certainty right now, I'm not saying necessarily I'm going to put them in the same category, right, with the Denver Nuggets, the Bucks, or Celtics. What I'm saying is, though, that's a team you're going to look at because of the components you have to have: point guard play, wing scoring, and then this unique weapon that's unique unto themselves in Zion. They can get really, really interesting. You look at the start they had a year ago, JJ, before he got hurt. This was a team that was leading the Western Conference, and it wasn't just a small sample size. Getting into the year, when he goes down, it changes their entire season, entire complexion of what they do. So for me, that's a team I'm looking at. I'm going to make an assumption that Zion can be healthy. I know that's a big reach, but if he is, they have the components that it takes, I think, to get into that conversation with Denver, the Lakers, Phoenix, teams like that in the Western Conference, and really challenge those teams.
Yeah, before any of our listeners or people watching on YouTube get really mad at us and want to stand for the Warriors, we'll throw the Warriors in that conversation too. We're going to get to them in a second. Relax. I know how Warriors fans are. We're going to get to the Warriors. We believe in the Warriors. We believe in the Dubs. All right, chill out. Few things I want to unpack there. Number one, on the Suns being a tier 1 team, I'm so glad you brought up this idea of core continuity because I think it's so important. I will be touching on this actually next week on our DraftKings Islands in the League episode. First episode of the season will be out next week. I'm recording that later today, but that's something that I really get into. The reason for me that I would put the Suns in that tier 1, you saw the play of Devin Booker in that Nuggets series. Kevin Durant, of course, struggled shooting the basketball a couple of times, but in terms of his scoring, his playmaking, all that stuff, top notch as always. They add Bradley Beal, and then all of a sudden there's all these question marks about their depth and their rotation. And I think on paper, at least, and we're going to see how this plays out in real time, on paper, at least, I think they have answered those questions. They've done it for what the mechanisms they had in place to build out this roster. I think they've done enough to put a nice rotation around those 3 guys. The other point I want to make up on core continuity, because I was thinking about this today in prepping for the Islands in the League episode, they also have a new coach. Frank Vogel's in there, right? And I was going back, recent NBA history, LA Lakers, 2020. They got a new coach. They bring in Anthony Davis, right? There's not a lot of core continuity there, but they've got Anthony Davis, and they've got LeBron James, and they've got a competent coach in Frank Vogel. And what happens? They win a championship. So that's, to me, those 2 things are the reason why I still have, at least on paper here, tier 1, I like the Suns in that group. You bring up the Pels being in first place when Zion went down, at being a fairly large sample size. I just want to follow up with that. 35 games, and I believe they were 23-12. And I think they were tied for first place. I could be wrong on that, but I think they were tied for first place at the time with Memphis when he got hurt against Philadelphia. The other thing I wanted to touch on with you specifically about Zion and why there's two big reasons I'm very bullish on a healthy Pels team. With Zion specifically, if you look at his playmaking each season, it has improved. And you bring up CJ as an elite point guard player. I don't necessarily view CJ as like there's very few traditional point guards, but in terms of a set the table guy, get into pick and roll, average 8 to 10 assists. That's not him. It's never been him. CJ is a scorer. He can facilitate. He can play make. He can play off the ball. He can play on the ball. But to me, the playmaking responsibilities, if I had to list it on the Pelicans, for me, it's like Zion and then BI and then CJ. And the luxury of having multiple guys that can make plays for other players, can draw a second defender. They have enough shooting, especially if Trey Murphy's comes back and he's healthy, and he was the Trey Murphy that he was from February on when he shot 42% from 3 on over 8, close to 8 attempts a game. To me, Zion's playmaking, he unlocks something offensively for this team when he's basically playing point forward. Second thing, and I want to get your thoughts on this. I said this last year, and I'll kind of say it again, but I want to see how this team kind of gels once they are fully healthy and everybody's back on the court in a few weeks. last year I felt like in terms of roster construction for a playoff series, I thought the Pels on paper were as good as anyone. They've got size. They've got some versatility. The best version of Larry Nance playing 5 in a playoff series where he can switch some on the perimeter. I know he was severely limited at times last year because of his injury. They've got shooting with Trey Murphy, CJ McCollum. BI obviously can shoot threes as well. They've got a lockdown wing defender in Herb Jones. They were a top 6 defense last year. They've got, girth, I would call it, size down low. We all saw what Valanciunas did in the World Cup. We know the player he is. They've got the rebounding component. They've got that X factor, that Jose Alvarado, the TJ McConnell, right? The guy who comes off the bench can win you a playoff game with making 4 or 5 plays at the end of a third quarter to change the momentum of a game. So I love this team, and the biggest what if, because this was one of my 3 things as well. The biggest what if outside of just Zion and his health, to me, is the overall health of the team. And they replaced Aaron Nelson, who was their head of performance and kind of oversaw their medical program this offseason. They've had a number of injuries. You think about, they were in first place last year. BI missed a large chunk of those first 35 games with a toe injury that took him forever to gain back. He really didn't regain his form till February on as well. So to me, it's the overall health. And certainly if you're going to get 70 or 75 games out of Zion, you're going to win a lot of basketball games.
Yeah, look, and I'm gonna add one more component to this for Zion Williamson. It's kind of been a head scratcher for me. I don't really understand why to this point in his career, and maybe he's never going to get there. But I think the challenge that I would be issuing Zion Williamson, because the scoring comes naturally for him. That combination of power and athleticism and quickness. We've seen what he can do anytime he gets single coverage, sometimes even double coverage. The way he can split through. His ability to finish with soft English at the rim and finish from all kinds of angles, despite his size. It really defies logic for a guy to be built like that and have that kind of touch on his finishes. We know about all that stuff and the damage that he can do. JJ, I think the challenge for Zion Williamson is go be a double-digit rebounder every single night, because number one, it helps you become a better defensive team overall. Because the final, component to any great defense is secure the basketball after one shot. And too often I see Zion kind of in that 15-foot range. He's guarding his guy. His guy didn't take the shot, and he kind of turns, watches the flight of the ball, starts drifting up the court, and the ball kicks off in an area that he probably could have gone and secured that rebound. Maybe they give up an offensive rebound right there. And then offensively, telling me a guy like Zion Williamson with the matchups that he has, and there really isn't one for him. If you put size on him, he's too quick. If you put a guy his height on him, he's far too powerful. Why is he not getting 4, 5, 6 offensive rebounds a lot of nights? So I think that next challenge for not just Zion Williamson and his evolution as a player, for their team to be more well-rounded and to get some of those possessions that they're not getting right now on both ends, that, I think, is the biggest challenge, because to me, there's no reason for it other than concentration, determination. Go get it. You've got to make your body move in that direction and put forth the effort. And I think Zion sometimes tends to drift, in that 75-foot range on either end of the floor. That last 20 feet, he's not getting to the baseline on either end sometimes on defensive and offensive possessions when shots are taken. I think that is another key challenge for Zion Williamson going forward as a player, and it will just help their team overall. But I like all the components you said. I just think that they check boxes of what you need to compete in this league. And unfortunately, it could come down to health, because they've had a bad spring. Even CJ McCollum wasn't healthy second half of the year.
I was going to mention that. I meant to mention that when I was talking about their health, and Kyra Lewis too, coming off a knee injury. Yeah, it's interesting. But you bring up the rebounding with Zion, and we have I would say a very small sample size over 4 seasons, 114 games played. He had his lowest offensive rebounding percentage last year. His highest was as a rookie. So that offensive rebounding percentage has gone down each year. And his defensive rebounding percentage has gone up each year. Last year was his best defensive rebounding percentage, still overall at about 12% total offensive or total rebounding percentage. If he can get that up to the high teens, where all of a sudden he's great. And the other point, on the defensive rebound that I'd like to add too, this guy's his own fast break in the same way that Russell Westbrook getting a defensive rebound. Okay, now we're off to the races. So if he can get that defensive rebounding, more of an emphasis there, and he's creating offense and transition opportunities for his team, I like that. Before we move on, I do want to talk about when I was talking about defensively, I should have also mentioned Dyson Daniels, who I thought had some really good stretches last year as a rookie. Does he take a step forward in his career? And then the rookie Jordan Hawkins, he's been shooting the basketball great in preseason. We all know he can shoot. He had an outstanding career at UConn. Where he is in the rotation to start the season, I don't know, but there's another component of shooting there. Legs, I'm going to go next with my what if, since we both kind of had the same one for the first one. And this is not an obligatory Lakers conversation. We all, we both work at ESPN. We know we have to talk about the Lakers every time. We cover other teams. All right, guys, we've talked about the Thunder. We're going to talk about the Minnesota Timberwolves in a second. All right. We cover other teams, but I think a big question mark for me going into the season is about Anthony Davis. Darvin Ham said he wants him taking, he's got a quota. He wants him taking 6 threes a game, right? Outside of the bubble, hasn't been an efficient jump shooter over the last few seasons, but wants him taking jump shots. LeBron James had some quotes the other day praising him as one of the all-time big guys in Lakers history. My what if is, what if LeBron is still playing in year 21 at a all-NBA, all-star level, but Anthony Davis is the best player on this Lakers team? What does that do to the Lakers' chances of winning? To me, if you're still getting that from LeBron and you're getting the best version of a healthy Anthony Davis, I will tomorrow put you in tier 1. Like, or I'll do it right now. Like, I really, we've seen when these guys as a duo are at their best, we know they can win a championship together. The pieces around them now, they fit, they make sense. There's enough on this roster, I think, to get it done. The one thing I would say that's kind of interesting, and Anthony Davis got dragged through the mud a little bit last year because of the Nuggets series. And I said, like, look, if you got a guy who's shooting 50% from the field and goes for 27 and 14 in a 4-game series, and you're telling me he didn't show up, like, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you. Did he have a couple of those nights? He had off nights. I get it. We argued about this, I think, on First Take, where like the aggression wanes a little bit. He kind of defers to LeBron, all that stuff. But if you look at the season he had, and obviously the counting stats are great. I went a little deeper. So last year, he averaged a career high in rebounds, regular season, career high in rebounds, career high in 2-point percentage. Remember, there was more of an emphasis of getting him the ball in lower towards the basket, out of pick and roll, lower on the block, less jump shots, really attacking the hoop. Career high in effective field goal percentage, career high in true shooting percentage. The guy, he didn't, to me, I kind of had him outside the All-NBA team because I didn't think he played enough games. But to me, he had an All-NBA season last year. So if he's healthy, and it seems like this Lakers organization, LeBron, Darvin Ham, front office, they are juiced about this guy and what he did in this offseason, coming into this season healthy, I have to say I'm high on the Lakers. If Anthony Davis approximates the best player on this team, as good as LeBron, as good as I think LeBron will be, even if there's a slight regression there from LeBron, he's still an all-star. He's still an all-NBA level player. This Lakers team, to me, becomes a tier 1 team if Anthony Davis is A1.
There's no doubt about it. And you're saying, what does this look like if LeBron James is able to replicate what he did a year ago and just look that way physically? I have no reason to doubt that that's going to be the case. Just looking at him and the way he takes care of himself, he defies really, everything that we know about longevity in the NBA. He defies everything about that. I mean, you and I can both testify to that. What your body feels like by the time you get that many games under your belt. Yeah. And he just continues to come out there and look the same way physically. I have no reason to doubt that he's going to look that way. They obviously addressed a lot of needs on their roster and filled out that supporting cast. You had a breakthrough year last year at Austin Reeves. He comes back now, much more confident player, and played with Team USA. I mean, where his confidence is going to be at the start of the year, you can't even really put a value on that now. He views himself completely differently than he did going into the year a year ago. You look at some of the key contributors they had in the postseason a year ago. Rui Hachimura, like, how's he going to feel about himself now coming into the season the way that he played, and he trained with LeBron in the offseason. So you can expect him.
Got an extension too.
Ground running right off the bat.
Got his money. Got some money. Yeah,
exactly
that clears your brain.
No question. You go get Gabe Vincent, right? You bring in Christian Wood, who's a guy that listen. He's going to have some issues defensively, but Christian Wood can score and he can rebound. So you have addressed issues up and down your roster. So let's get to the core of what you said, which is Anthony Davis. And when you and I were talking about a year ago in the postseason, I always use this correlation, like whatever your pregame routine is at home, whatever that is, with your pregame meal, your nap, like whatever it is you do, you get a massage, whatever it is that you do. When you finally get up, heading out of the house, and you're headed down to the arena, or you're leaving the hotel if you're on the road to go down to get that ride over to the arena, are you in the mentality to go there and be the best player on the floor? Like every night, I'm going there tonight to do damage. I'm going to dominate. Or some nights, are you just saying, well, I got a game tonight? And that's where, we kind of fall with Anthony Davis some nights. And we don't understand with that physical package why some nights it doesn't look like he's there to do damage. When he is, come on, this is one of the elite players in this league on both ends of the floor when he looks that way. So I agree with you. Based on their run they had at the end of the year, based on their roster additions, based on the way Anthony Davis looked, if Anthony Davis is the best player on this team, you know what it looks like, JJ? It looks like 2020 all over again. That's what it looks like. So if you think about that bubble playoff performance from Anthony Davis, LeBron James was more than willing to allow him to be the best player. He wanted him to be the best player. It led to a Finals MVP. That's what Anthony Davis did for that team when he was in that mindset. And now that you've added some pieces to maybe take some of the pressure off of both of those guys on a given night, because you've got more punch, you've got more firepower that you added. So it doesn't have to be the scrutiny every single night on LeBron and AD the way that it was a year ago. That's even going to help him, I think, manage the regular season, keep him fresh for the postseason, and not have as much pressure possession by possession where we are so focused on what he looks like, because they've got some supplemental parts that are going to help them. So I agree. They're an if case, but no doubt that this is a team that's good enough to potentially win the Western Conference on paper. But we're going to have to see a little bit more as we get into the year and how these role players are accepting their roles. Are they fitting in? Are they comfortable with what they're doing now, leaving teams and now joining the Lakers? How does LeBron look? How does AD look? There's some things we've got to see. But when you just look at what it says on paper about the Lakers and their roster, yeah, this is a team that quickly can have us including them in that conversation as we get, a month, 6 weeks into the season.
Yeah.
There's a very good chance, JJ, they will leave no doubt in anybody's mind that they're going to be in this thing for the long run, and they're a team that's a legitimate threat to get to the finals.
Yeah, and I think, too, I want to put out a disclaimer for all of our listeners and viewers for the entire regular season. I'm a believer that the regular season does matter. I want to say that. But I also want to say, when I talk about contenders, and I think, Legs, you fall in this camp too, we're not as focused on regular season record, if that makes sense. Like, I think we both felt that going into the playoffs last year, I know I said this, there were 6, maybe I could talk myself into 7 teams that could potentially win the Western Conference. Warriors were one of those teams. Lakers were one of those teams. They were 44-38 and 43-39 last year in the regular season. We're assessing this in real time, sure, but we're also sort of looking ahead at potential playoff matchups. And one of the reasons I do like this Lakers team is because of their size. And I think to get through the Denver Nuggets, you have to have positional size. And, whether that's Anthony Davis, whether that's Rui Hachimura, LeBron, Taurean Prince, who they got for cheap towards the end of the summer, And then the addition of Gabe Vincent adding more shooting. Like, again, I look at this whole thing in its entirety and not just, I'm not going to knee jerk react like some of our colleagues if the Lakers start out 8-6. You know, we need to look at this thing as a whole. I want to stay in the Western Conference for your second thing. Give me your next what if for a team to become a true contender.
Oh, you mentioned the Warriors a little while ago, so let's focus there. And you know, a lot of people probably think I'm about to talk about Chris Paul. I'm not going to talk about Chris Paul other than to say this. Chris Paul's going to play well. There's no question in my mind. He's going to play well. And now I think it's a legitimate question about fit and style and pace. I think that stuff is legitimate. And I was just out there with those guys and talked to Chris Paul about this. He almost seems agitated when you even bring up the word fit or style. Like it bothers him because he says, you know, I'm a basketball player. I know how to play. I'm going to adapt. You think I forgot how to move without the ball and cut? It's basically what he said verbatim when this question comes up. I think it's a legitimate question because the Warriors are at their best playing fast. I don't know that you put Chris Paul in the category of playing fast, you know, really ever, but especially now, right? He's a guy that it's different. He balls in his hand all the time. That's when he's at his best. A lot of pick and roll, a lot of probing in half court sets. The Warriors are at their best when the ball comes off the glass. They get up the floor with urgency. They spread the floor, and they immediately get you back on your heels trying to defend all that spacing and shooting, right? That's when they're at their best. So I do think it's a legitimate question, but I have no doubt that Chris Paul is going to play well. He's an all-time great player. So for me, the focus lies on where else does the growth need to come from? And I think it's Jonathan Kuminga, JJ. I think he's a guy that when I saw him in Las Vegas, first time before he started playing for the Warriors, I said, this guy is going to be a future All-Star. And I've been sort of staying with that. I haven't given up on that. I think at times the Warriors.
I love this, Tim.
Yeah,
I love that you're willing to provide that take. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
And I'm staying with it. I think Jonathan Kuminga. Now, look, there are some things that I don't know. And certainly the guys in the organization and some of those guys I know pretty well. They're not going to tell you and let you, peel back the curtain if for some reason, like Jonathan Kuminga is just not a worker. If he's not a grinder, if he's not addicted and obsessed with being great, then that won't happen, what I just said. That's something that hasn't been revealed about him. So I'm not gonna make the assumption. I'm gonna make the assumption this guy wants to be great, and the physical tools are there. Here's what I think has happened to him, JJ, in the first couple of years here. And you got to remember, this guy just turned 21. Yeah. He's going to be 21 the entire season. Okay. So that's how young he is. And sometimes you forget because he's been in the mix now for 2 full seasons and you're watching him, you see these flashes, but the truth is he's 21 years old and this is going into year 3. And where he has to show that growth is the consistency, the trust. I think Steve Kerr and that coaching staff, they start to lose trust in Jonathan Kuminga as the season goes on and in pressure situations. You look at last year, he had a pretty decent regular season for a 20-year-old, right? He averaged just about 10 points a game. He was in the rotation every single night, playing 16 minutes. Some nights playing 25 minutes. Gets to the postseason, he plays 10 games, averages 6 minutes a game. They lost trust factor in Jonathan Kuminga as the year went on. So that breakthrough has to come there. He's got to force them to trust him. He's been sensational in the preseason.
Oh, God. So
but
good.
We all know what that means. I mean, he's getting a lot of opportunities. He's getting a lot of touches. He's relevant. He's important. He's the guy that they're going through at times because they want to see that elevation in his confidence level and the trust factor build. This is a huge year for him. And JJ, here's why. They need his physical package. This is not a team that's overly athletic. Last year, I thought they looked so small. When they would go with their smaller lineups, they were getting thrown all over the place. They didn't have wings with length that they had before. When you had an Andre Iguodala, you had a Sean Livingston. You're going to guys like a Dante DiVincenzo. You're going with a Jordan Poole. It's just a smaller look out there. And they got manhandled at times. Jonathan Kuminga can answer some of that. He is 6'7". He's one of the best athletes in the NBA. He's got great wingspan, great length. I think he has the ability to become a really, significant, impactful defender when he becomes more conscientious about that. They need his size, his length, his athletic ability, and his growth. to be able to get into that category, I think, with teams like Denver and Phoenix in the Western Conference, potentially even the Lakers, he, to me, is even more important than Chris Paul, because I think I know what I'm getting out of Chris Paul. I'm not sure about Kuminga, and I want to see that big leap this year, where he goes and he averages 14, 15 points a game, and he's on the floor for 25, 30 minutes in playoff games. That's the next step for him, and that's the next step, I think, for this franchise to have another significant run in them.
We mentioned this with Kuminga on the Old Man and Three Things. I believe it was either last week or the week before, but he was shooting well over 50% on 6.5 3-point attempts a game through the first 3 preseason games, I believe. It's small stuff for me towards the end of last season that I got excited about, because I think the Warriors are going to play a certain way. Even with the addition of Chris Paul, they're not going to go away from their core identity, whether that's the split screens, using the attention of Steph to create 4-on-3s on the backside. And it's small stuff, but on a baseline drive, Kuminga's in the opposite slot. He makes the face cut for the layup. They put 2 on the ball. Draymond's going downhill. Kuminga's in the left corner. He makes the back cut out of the corner for a finish. Figuring out, Steph talked about this last year, figuring out how to play through the chaos that is the Steph Curry offense. It's hard, and it's particularly hard for a young player who hasn't played a ton of basketball. So it's small stuff like that got me excited. I mentioned the shooting. That gets me excited. I want to go back real quick on the CP thing, and you bring up the size. So essentially they got smaller. Right? They bring in
smaller
CP.
They got smaller and older.
Yeah.
Wait, so we don't know if that's necessarily a great.
So I agree with you. The Kuminga, in terms of his rebounding, his defense, right, creating havoc, deflections, all that stuff on defense, gonna be huge. I've talked myself into the CP being a great fit on the Warriors. You mentioned just the basketball intelligence. He's gonna figure it out. And to me, it's a counterbalance to how the Warriors play. It is chaos. There are a lot of turnovers. He's going to provide a little bit of structure. He's going to take care of the basketball. You mentioned the pace. Well, look, I've watched a bunch of their preseason games. To me, he was more than willing to just get the ball and do the kick-ahead pass, right? Not make the pass for the assist, but just creating pace with the pass. Draymond's as good as anyone with that as well. Lonzo Ball comes to mind. Of course, he hasn't played in a couple of years, but Lonzo was as good as anybody in the NBA. Jay Kidd from your era, right? As good as anybody with creating pace just with the simple kick-ahead pass. CP knows how to do that. In terms of playing off the ball, he did that for 2 seasons in Houston with James Harden. He's a smart player. He's going to figure it out and figure out where to pick and choose his spots, where he can make an impact, all that stuff. And then the last point on the Warriors, which to me, we probably don't talk about enough, and that's when they won in 2022, Andrew Wiggins was their second best player. His offensive, defensive, rebounding impact in that Dallas series and against Boston, as great as Steph was, he was important. And he was their second best player.
Yeah.
If you go to the end of last season, he missed a ton of time. It's some personal matters he had to attend to. And he was rusty in the playoffs. He wasn't the version of Andrew Wiggins that we had seen the previous season. And he had gotten off to, if you remember this, Tim, the first month or 2 months of the season, Andrew Wiggins was shooting about 43% on 7 attempts for a game from 3. And then he has an injury, comes back, rusty again, and then misses a ton of time. So he didn't really have a complete NBA season last year. So you talk about size, him, Kuminga, Draymond with his wingspan, it certainly, alleviates some of that pressure that they have because they play smaller guards. I'm going to stay real quick, Western Conference, because I knew we were going to do this, Tim, and we're going to have a problem trying to keep this show to 30 minutes. I'll be honest with you. We're going to have a problem because you and I can riff on this stuff all day.
It's going to be hard to get it to 30 with you and I talking basketball.
We're going to have to ask for a waiver. Try to make these episodes a little bit longer. I want to be quick. My big what if centers around Chris Finch and the Cat Rudy Gobert pairing. I am so confident in Anthony Edwards as a superstar in this league, as a potential top 5 player, as the best player potentially on a winning team, on a championship level team. I'm very confident in that. Confident in that because of how he played last regular season. I'm confident that how he played with the World Cup team. Go back to that Denver series in the first round, 5 games, a little under 32 points a game, 5 rebounds, over 5 assists, 3.8 stocks per game, shot 48% from the field, got to the foul line 8 times a game. He's a bona fide superstar. And I think he'll be even better this year. On paper, I really like Minnesota. Here's a crazy stat for you. I did not know this till I looked this up this morning. In 5 playoff games against Denver, Rudy Gobert and Karl-Anthony Towns played 119 minutes together. Do you know how many minutes they played together in the regular season? The entire regular season. 128. And when we talked to Chris Finch at the beginning of September, this was a big point of emphasis that he has to figure out. He knows it. And he spent a ton of time this offseason trying to figure that out, how to make this pairing work. And from what I saw in the preseason, I think they did a great job of getting the ball to Karl-Anthony Towns in space, figuring out ways, whether it's a simple flare screen, almost like an Iverson cut, getting him on the move a little bit, just so that he has more space to attack. He's played his whole career as a 5-man. He's attacking closeouts, right? He can beat some 5 men off the dribble. They give him space. He's shooting threes. And last year, I think was a big adjustment for him. And he was hurt for a large chunk of the season. So I'm not ready to give up on the Chris Finch figuring out the Rudy Gobert, Karl-Anthony Towns pairing, and this team ultimately becoming I'll call it now, a home court team in the Western Conference playoffs with a real chance to make a run.
I love this because I think you're dead on about this team. Listen, you need time to make these kinds of adjustments. When you looked at when they brought in Rudy Gobert and everybody looked at that move, you're saying, well, okay, this is interesting because the rest of the league is getting smaller and more versatile, and they just got bigger, right? And probably less versatile defensively. And versatility defensively, so critical when teams are taking, 43 pointers a night and you're spaced out all over the floor. To be able to have guys on the floor that can get, cover great distances defensively on making rotations and get the closeouts and contest at the 3-point line is really important. So here they go and they get bigger. And that's not necessarily a strength of either of those 2 guys. And you're saying, okay, well, how's this going to work? They're going to come about this in a very unique way, the way that this team looks physically and their profile on the court. And they didn't get much of a chance to really do that together. And this is going to be an adjustment period that you would need when you add something like that. So now you come into this season, you're going to have more time. You're going to have a much greater sample size, hopefully, if everybody stays healthy. By the time you get to Christmas and you're a couple months in, you're going to have a much better idea of how this look translates to winning in the modern NBA, the way that teams are built offensively. And that's what we're going to need to see. As far as Anthony Edwards goes, you're right. I mean, he's got the entire package. He continues to get more efficient. His shot selection's improving. He still has to continue to get better. I think, JJ, as he, becomes that guy that defenses now are changing their game plan for and overloading toward. Now the next component's going to be, can Anthony Edwards beat you on a night when he's seeing so much traffic that he goes for 21 and he gets you 12 dimes. And 6 of those are weak side threes because of the way that he is reading the floor, delivering the basketball, and trusting guys. I think that's going to be the evolution for Anthony Edwards because he's on the map now as a big-time scorer in this league. And you saw what he did over the summer, Team USA. Now it's even more elevated coming into the season. So the responsibility that comes with that is to be the guy that accepts being the big name at the top of the whiteboard in the other locker room and what comes with that, and your responsibility and your overall versatility offensively to still be able to beat teams when you see overloads. And that's going to be, what we're going to be watching for Anthony Edwards here at the beginning of the year. I think this is a fascinating team. I want you to give me 30-game sample size, right? So that takes you somewhere into, the holiday season. Let's take a look at what Minnesota looks like at that time. But I think it's a very interesting take on their sort of lurking beneath the surface right now as a team that could elevate themselves into the category of these other teams we've been talking about.
You bring up the spacing with Anthony Edwards. This is not a rant. This is not a rant. And shout out to Nekias Duncan and Steve Jones of the Dunker Spot. But I do not believe in the Dunker Spot, the place on the basketball floor, not the podcast. I believe in the podcast. I hate the Dunker Spot. And to me, there's only one time that you should ever have someone on the Dunker Spot. And that is if you were posting the ball on one side of the floor. There's really nowhere else to go but to have someone on the Dunker Spot. So I'll give you an example. Philadelphia 76ers, we're playing with Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. And a lot of times we would run high pick and rolls with Ben in the Dunker Spot. And it just clogged everything up. Now, if Joel's posting, Ben's obviously initiating the offense. He cuts through, he gets the Dunker Spot. Got no problem with that, right? Generally speaking, I'm the next guy around the perimeter, and nobody's double teaming me, or nobody's going to double team Joe on a post up and leaving me. So oftentimes it's coming from the weak side. You can get 2-on-1 action back there. So if you're posting the basketball, and let's say it's Karl-Anthony Towns, put Gobert in the Dunker Spot. The thing I'm watching in their offense is and Chris Finch wants to play 5 out. He wants to play delay action, right? As they're running their normal offense, non-post up offense, and Gobert sets a pick and roll. Where's he going if he doesn't get the ball? That is literally what I will be watching with Minnesota. To me, all the guys that are non-shooters, right, get them behind the line. The best thing that they can do off the ball is get a kick out and go immediately into a dribble handoff, or screen away, right? Set an off-ball screen. Anthony Edwards is getting downhill. Rudy Gobert's over in the corner. Their defenses aren't paying attention to him. Go set a flare screen on the guy at the elbow, the X guy, right? There's so many things you can do creatively off the ball with non-shooters. Stop putting them in the fucking Dunker Spot. That's what clogs it up. When Anthony Edwards was complaining at the beginning of the season last year, you go watch. Gobert's just hanging out in the Dunker Spot. Get him out of there. There's other things you can do with him. Right? Weak side, they kick to him, go DHO with Mike Conley. All right? The other thing I want to mention with Minnesota, they did not have Naz Reid and Jaden McDaniels in that playoff series. Naz had gotten hurt. Jaden McDaniels punched a wall. So they were missing them. And it's interesting. I've seen a bunch of player interviews this offseason. Guys being asked, who are the best perimeter defenders, And they name 3, 4, 5 guys, whatever. Jaden always gets mentioned. He's another sort of X factor for this team. All right, Tim, let's wrap up with your final what if. And I think we could do an entire episode on your final what if because it is unresolved. But I want to hear this.
It is. And look, JJ, to this point, pretty much our entire focus has been on the Western Conference, right? And I think the reason for that is we look at the East. You've got Milwaukee and Boston. We know what they are. Certainly. And you say, man, just nobody really stacks up when you're trying to get them into the conversation. You got the Knicks out there. You got the Cavs out there. Like, do you really buy in that they're going to be able to get on that level? So for me, to make it interesting in the East, there's one other team. And you sort of just mentioned a couple components there with this team. That's the Philadelphia 76ers. And I say, well, where's that coming from? With all of this turmoil and everything they're dealing with James Harden, coming out of the summer, demanding a trade, still on the roster, force him into camp. Now he's just missing days. Nick Nurse doesn't know where he is. How are you going to put Philadelphia in this mix? Well, it's simple. If 2 things happen. One, James Harden gets moved. Like, I don't see this being a situation that's going to resolve itself. There's just too much damage has been done. Now, James Harden's market value is greatly diminished, and I don't know what necessarily the Sixers would get in a return. It's certainly not going to look like a guy that's a perennial all-star caliber player for James Harden. I just don't believe that that's his market value anymore because what teams are looking at with him. 1, he's been breaking down physically. 2, he does not play well in big moments in the playoffs. And 3, he's actually a guy that now is sort of diminished what he was as a top tier player in this league, as an MVP caliber player. So all of those things have dropped off, and you've got to change your entire style to accommodate him. So you add all that up. I don't know what his market value is, JJ, but let's just say they're able to move him and get back some pieces that identify what you need. Maybe it's more shooting. Maybe it's a little bit more length defensively. Okay, so you can move him. At some point, he will be moved. You get back those kinds of pieces. The second piece is even more important. It's Tyrese Maxey. And here's why I say that. Do we know what his ceiling is? We do not. I think we all like Tyrese Maxey a lot, right? And we love the bounce he plays with, the speed, elite level end-to-end player. He's turned himself into a big-time three-point shooter off the catch and off the dribble. So Tyrese Maxey is elevating himself into that category of a guy to say, hey, man, this guy potentially could be a star in this league, but we don't know yet because he has lived in the shadow of Joel Embiid. He lived in the shadow of Ben Simmons. He was living in the shadow of James Harden. So he's lurking in the shadows and still having these sensational nights of electricity. Well, what if it turns out he is the guy? He is that good. So now if you've moved Harden, you've gotten back pieces that actually round out your roster even better and make you a more complete team. And Tyrese Maxey is given the basketball, and he turns out he is a star. Well, now Philadelphia, because of the unique nature of Joel Embiid, and they're the only team in the league that has one of those, now Philadelphia is that team to me, based on the top talent on their roster. That's the team I look at and say they can make things interesting for Boston and Milwaukee, but they've got to get out from this James Harden drama. They've got to move on from that, give the ball to Maxey, and bring in some pieces to round out your team. And I think also, by the way, one more component, JJ, you and I talked about this. I think James Harden's, ineptitude in big spots in the playoffs since he got to Philly has dramatically affected Joel Embiid. It's you can see his shoulders drop. He puts more pressure on himself. Overall, it doesn't show great leadership qualities when Harden is in those moments when it's obvious he just is not going to have it tonight in a big spot. Joel Embiid has not risen to the occasion. He's actually allowed it to affect him and dragged him down as well. So now both guys aren't playing well at the same time. Well, now you remove yourself from that, and you got a guy in Maxey that shows that, hey, he can be a big game player. He's going to be here. I'm going to be here next to you tonight, Joel, and we're both going to show up. Maybe that elevates Embiid too, to know that you actually have a guy with the basketball most of the game that's not going to run from the light. And I think that's very, very important for Philly. So to me, they're a fascinating team, only if, though, they move on from Harden and Maxey is that guy that he's going to need to be to get into the conversation with Milwaukee and Boston.
It's an interesting thought. The James Harden's play at times could potentially be bringing down Joel Embiid. I'm not going to expand on that because we are sort of out of time. I do want to say two things. Number one is that I've been pounding this Maxey drum since they were eliminated from the playoffs and Doc was fired. I said, whoever is the next guy, like your number one priority should be, how do I maximize this player? And how do I find out how good this guy can be? Put the ball in his hands, right? Secondly, I do think there is, going back to a theme, I think, of this episode, I do think there is some core continuity with this 76ers roster. And they also have a new voice. So it's, in some ways, it's a fresh start. I've seen 15 different quotes about Nick Nurse and the voice and his way of doing things. It's almost like that core is in some ways refreshed. Tobias comes to mind, of course, who kind of was asked to just play off the ball and be the fifth option last year. So I'm sure we're going to touch on this more as this situation evolves in Philadelphia. Tim, great first episode. Really appreciate it, man. We're going to talk to you next week.
You got it, JJ. Let's kick this thing off, man. I can't wait.
All right.